Hello, I'm Mrs. Flavor.
And I'm Mrs. Reed.
And I'm Miss Whitehouse.
And we are all your Year 5 team. We will be teaching your children during the term, and we have a brand new spring term video ready for you to watch. We hope you enjoy it. We would like you to try and interact and discuss some of the things that you see on the video with the children. Enjoy.
Hello, Mrs. Reed here, and I'm going to be telling you about the reading and writing we're going to be covering in this term's curriculum. Before I start, we'll have a look at 4 of our flashback questions, just to check that you haven't forgotten any of your prior learning. Question 1. What is a relative clause? A relative clause adds more detail to a noun. Remember, a main clause makes sense on its own, but the relative clause doesn't. A relative clause often starts with which, where, who, or whose. For example, the firefighter looked at the old oven where the fire had started. Flashback question 2. Do you remember writing newspaper reports? If so, could you list the organisational features of them? You have your title, a headline, subheadings, pictures or diagrams, a caption to explain what they're about, and of course the newspaper articles. Flashback question 3. Can you remember what synonyms are? In which type of book would you find synonyms if you wanted to look some new ones up? And could you give some examples of how angry Zeus, king of the gods, felt? Synonyms are words that have the same meaning, and you can use a thesaurus to find them. Zeus was angry, but you could also say that he was annoyed, he was cross, he was enraged, or he was furious. And finally, flashback 4. What is a dilemma? Would you be able to explain how both King Midas and Billy in Bling faced a terrible dilemma? A dilemma is a situation in which a difficult choice has to be made between 2 or more alternatives, both of which are usually undesirable. King Midas had to choose whether to lose his power or starve to death because everything he touched turned to gold, even his food. Now Billy had to choose between keeping his gold maker and making all his friends happy, or whether to have his beloved cat and best friend Goji back. Do you remember? We're starting off this term by reading some poetry, and these are the targets which we hope your children will achieve by the end of this unit. We're going to read a range of poems about the city, and we're going to make connections with the children's own experiences and other poems that they may have read in the past. We're going to think about how poets use powerful language and special phrases to create effect. And we're going to understand some poetic terms such as rhyme, alliteration, simile, metaphor, and personification. And we're going to perform a poem using expression to show our understanding of it. We're then going to write our own poetry. We're going to write a poem about a classroom, building vivid images in the reader's mind. We're going to use personification, which I'll come on to later. We're going to create vivid images using similes, metaphors, and interesting synonyms. and we're going to use the poetic techniques we've learned, such as alliteration and repetition. Our grammar for the initial fiction section of the unit is to use personification. A synonym for the word person is human, so personification means giving human characteristics to a non-human object. In our poem, Last Night I Saw the City Breathing, it clearly says that the city is breathing, the city is laughing, the city is dancing, the city is starving, the city is crying, and the city is sleeping. And all of these characteristics would normally apply to a human object and not a city, and we're going to explore how these characteristics can be used for non-human objects. Our poem is going to be written in free verse, so we'll be using line breaks as well as commas to show the reader where to pause when reading aloud, so we won't be using our usual conventions of punctuation that we've been learning. Have a look at the poem below. What are you able to build with your blocks? Castles and palaces, temples and docks. Rain may keep raining and others go roam, but I can be happy and building at home. Now moving on to the second section of the unit, that's non-fiction. We're going to start off reading some persuasive writing and explore different forms of persuasive texts and consider when and why they are used. We're going to understand that persuasive writing has a clear purpose and an intended audience, and we're going to explore how opinions can be disguised as facts in order to persuade the reader. We're even going to have a go at discussion and changing somebody's opinion by explaining something or reasoning with them. Our grammar for the non-fiction part of the unit is to use modal verbs. These are verbs which show the possibility of something happening, and it's a way of persuading the reader to your point of view. There are a few examples on the poster below. You could do this, you might do this, you must do this. And finally, we're going to complete the unit with you doing your own piece of persuasive writing. You're going to write a presentation persuading people to consider your point of view about whether or not a new football stadium should be built. You'll have to put your ideas across in a powerful and memorable way to persuade your reader. And you're going to have to remember to use persuasive phrases such as, "It's about time," and "Don't even think that," to persuade people to your point of view. It's a really good fun unit. Anyway, I hope this has made the unit a little bit clearer to you, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate asking one of the Year 5 team if there's anything else that you need to know about our reading and writing units.
Hi everyone, hope you had a lovely Christmas holiday. Myself and the other Year 5 teachers can't wait to teach your children numeracy in the spring term. We will be following on from last term and focusing on the number operations. This includes addition, subtraction and multiplication and division this term. We will of course go back to the learning that the children are finding tricky in terms of addition and subtraction. This will be drip fed into math skills lessons. Within this unit, we will be looking at prime numbers, square numbers, cube numbers, multiples and factors. Within this unit, we will also teach the children some written methods, such as the bus stop method. Throughout the unit, the children will be applying their knowledge to solve multiplication and division questions as well, as it's really important that they apply their knowledge to different questions. As usual, times table is such a big focus for us at school. The children will have regular times table lessons which meet our multiplication policies at school. We'll also have weekly times table sessions in math skills where the children will be able to access TT Rockstars. Per week, there's always a battle between the two Year 5 classes, so the children will work hard to get the most points for their classes and in turn will be practicing their times tables. As normal as well, regular maths homework will be set on a weekly basis, which does relate to the unit that we are on. At the start of all of our lessons now, we do something called a flashback 4, which goes back to the previous lesson, term or unit that the children were focusing on. So for the first question, it could be a question along the lines of, what is a factor? And give me an example of a factor of 20. The children would then go on to discuss with their peers what they think that their answer is. So the answer I would be expecting from the children would be, a factor is a number that can be times by another number to reach a certain number. An example of a factor of 20 could be 4, 5, 1 or 20. Here is another example of a flashback 4 taken from a children's previous lesson. So another example is, what is a prime number? And give an example of a prime number. So the children will know now that a prime number is a number that can be divided by itself and 1. Now an example of a prime number would be the number 13. It can only be divided by 1 and itself. There's not another number that will go into 13. Again, here's another example of a flashback 4. However, this flashback 4 is going back to the previous unit that the children were taught, and that is addition and subtraction. So, question 3 is, can you use the inverse to find the missing number to this calculation? Now, the children have done loads of work on the inverse method, so they should get this question quite easily. We know that the question is asking us to add something to 3,456 to make 9,876, but we've got to use the inverse. So the inverse of addition would be subtraction. So we would need to subtract 3,456 from 9,876, which will give us the answer 6,420. We will also include a flashback 4 that goes back to the previous term. So, in the first term, the children were taught all about place value. Within the place value unit, the children would have to learn about Roman numerals. We spent a couple of weeks on Roman numerals in numeracy and the children got quite a good understanding from this. So this flashback 4 question again should be quite simple to the children. So question 4 is, how do I write 900 in Roman numerals? 900 would be in Roman numerals CM. The children would know that M is the same as 1,000 and C is 100. Now, the C goes before the M because when the lower value digit comes before the higher value digit in Roman numerals, we subtract. So it would, in theory, be 1,000 take away 100. Now let's go on to looking at prime numbers. The children have already started to cover prime numbers in their numeracy lessons through their daily warm-ups. This has hopefully helped the children ready in time for the unit. In Year 5, the children are expected to establish whether a number up to 100 is prime or not, and also record all of the prime numbers up to 19. Can you remember from your lessons what a prime number is? Let's see if you are correct. Were you correct? A prime number is a number that can only be divided by itself and 1 and has no remainders. Prime numbers are all odd except from one number. Do you know which number this is? Can you also have a go at telling an adult at home an example of a number which is not prime and why this is? So think about what is a prime number and think about all the numbers that could not be prime and tell your adult a reason why. Now we know that prime numbers can only be divided by themselves and 1. Let's see if we can find the prime numbers in this 100 square grid. First of all, do you notice a pattern with the highlighted numbers? I can tell you there is no pattern. All of the numbers that are highlighted are prime numbers. The only even prime number is 2. All of the other prime numbers are odd. All even numbers, including 2, are not prime because they can be divided by 2, which means they are not prime. Let's go on to look at square numbers now. So square numbers are when numbers are multiplied by themselves. The children will become really familiar with the squared number symbol, which is a small 2 after the number, as you can see on the slide. On the slide, I have put all of the square numbers up to 12 times 12. If we look at an example, such as 16, 16 is a squared number because we have times 4 by 4. Another example is 49. 49 is also a squared number because we have times 7 by 7. You are able to look at the rest of the square numbers up to 12 times 12 on the slide. Now we know that square numbers are numbers that are times by themselves. Let's see if we can identify the square numbers on the grid. So, 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. Can you see a pattern emerging as we multiply the numbers by themselves? Square numbers are also called square numbers because they make a square, like you can see me doing on the board now. It creates its very own square when it's multiplied by together. Let's have a look as well where we can apply square numbers to in maths. We can also apply them when finding the area to different shapes. The area, remember, is the space inside of the square or any shape that you're finding the area for. So, for example, this one would be 6 times 6 equals 36 centimetres squared. Don't forget the units. This one would be 8 times 8 equals 64 centimetres squared. 25 times 25 equals 625 centimetres squared. And the last one would be 100 times 100, which equals 10,000 centimetres square. There you have square numbers and finding the area of different shapes. This can of course be applied to different shapes and different distances. let's have a look at cube numbers now. So cube numbers are very similar to square numbers. When we talk about cube numbers, this is where a number is multiplied by itself 3 times. They're a little bit more tricky to learn compared to the square numbers, as the totals are much larger, as you can see. One that might catch the children out is 1 times 1 times 1, so 1 cubed, as a lot of the children might think that is 3, but it is actually 1. Like squared numbers, the children will become familiar with the symbol that symbolises cube numbers. As you can see on the slide, instead of a little 2 to represent square numbers, cube numbers use a small 3 after the number. Now we know what cube numbers are, we can start to work out some of our own cube numbers. Let's have a look. So 1 cubed is the same as 1 times 1 times 1, which will equal 1. 2 cubed would be 2 times 2 times 2, which would equal 8. 3 cubed we would write as 3 times 3 times 3, which will equal 27. 4 times 4 times 4 can be wrote as 4 cubed. We know what the symbol is for cubed. That's a small 3 at the side of the number. 5 cubed would be 5 times 5 times 5, which would equal 125. 6 cubed would be 216. This one's a little bit more tricky, okay? 343 would be 7 cubed, so it'd be 7 times 7 times by 7. 8 cubed would be 8 times 8 times 8, that would equal 512. 9 times 9 times 9 is 9 cubed. 10 cubed would be 10 times 10 times 10, which would equal 1000. Before we move on to talking about factors and multiples, can you tell an adult at home what a factor is and what a multiple is, and maybe some examples of both? We have already looked at this in lessons, so you should have a brief idea of what they are. Did you get it right? So, factors are numbers which are multiplied with another number to get to a certain number. For example, the factors of 20 would be 1, 2, 4, 5, 10 and 20. Can you think of the factors for 40 now that you know the factors of 20? Will that help us in any way? Would they be similar to the factors of 20? Now, sometimes it's quite hard for the children to come up with the factors for a number. So we look at something called factor pairs, which I have done an example of on the next slide. We are going to start by finding the factors of 36. We're going to be finding factor pairs. So we're going to start with 1. How many 1s go into 36? 1 goes into 36 36 times. How about 2? How many 2s go into 36? How can we use the first factor to help us find how many times 2 goes into 36? We can just halve it. 2 goes into 36 18 times. How about 3? How many 3s go into 36? 3 goes into 36 12 times. How about 4? How many 4s go into 36? 4 goes into 36 9 times. Now, let's have a look how many 5s go into 36. 5 does not go into 36. So what do we put next to the 5? We just put a cross. How many times does 6 go into 36? 6 goes into 36 6 times. How about 7? 7 does not go into 36. It would be 35. How about 8? Does 8 go into 36? No. We would then look at how many times 9 goes into 36. We can already see that 9 goes into 36 4 times. That means we've found all of the factors of 36. Did you get it right? Let's have a look. So multiples are numbers which appear in a numbers times table. For example, the first 3 multiples of 7 are 7, 14 and 21. Now on this slide is an example of a question that the children might have in a test all to do with multiples. So let's have a look at the first one. Which number is a multiple of 4? Now, of course, the children need to know their times table to answer these questions correctly. There are 3 multiples as a choice. There's 6, there's 12, there's 14. We know that 6 is not a multiple of 4, as 6 does not come in the 4 times table. 14 is also not a multiple of 4. However, 12 is. 4 times 3 is 12, so 12 is a multiple of 4. On the next slide, I've done a demonstration on how to get the first 5 multiples of 3 and how this can help us to get the 5 first multiples for 6. Now we know what multiples are, let's have a look at the first 5 multiples of 3. The first 5 multiples of 3 would be 3, 6, 9, 12 and 15. They're all numbers that come in the 3 times table. How can we use multiples of 3 to help us to find multiples of 6? We can just double the multiples of 3. So, the first 5 multiples of 6 would be 6, 12, 18, 24 and 30. There are many methods that we will be teaching the children during this unit. One method for multiplication is the chunked partitioning method. So if we have a look at this question here, 2,435 times by 8. We're going to be having a look at the place value for this calculation, the place values of the numbers. So first of all, I will start off by doing 2,000 times by 8. So I'm dealing with the thousands value. That would equal 16,000. I would then do 400 times 8, which is 3,200. I would then go on to look at my tens column. So that would be 30 times 8, which would equal 240. I would then look at my ones column. So that would be 5 times 8, which equals 40. Now it's really important that the children line up their numbers correctly so it doesn't confuse them when they come to add it up. So 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 4 plus 4 is 8. 2 plus 2 is 4. 6 plus 3 is 9. 1 plus 0 is 1. That would equal 19,400 and 80. Let's have a look at the division method that we use. So this is called the bus stop method. So I always put the number outside of the bus stop, which I am dividing by. And I always put the number that needs dividing inside of the bus stop. Okay, now I've got my bus stop sorted, let's have a go. So I first look at how many sixes go into 6. That is 1. Now, how many sixes go into 4? Sixes don't go into 4, so I put a 0 as a placeholder. Then I will carry my 4 across to my 1s column. Then I would look at how many sixes go into 42. That's 7. So my answer is 107.
This term we're going to be geographers. We're exploring and finding out about the world in which we live. Within that we're going to be thinking about our Wren's Nest schemas, which are technology, fashion and food. Let's go back a bit to what we have learned and our flashback for. So first question is, how did the government of Britain decide to exit the European Union, a Brexit as we know it? Well, it was decided because the people of Great Britain voted against being part of the EU because they wanted us to have more control over trade and immigration. Our second flashback for looks back to the unit that you did last term or last year with in Year 4. How many states are there in North America? Well, the answer is there are 52 states in North America. Hawaii is one, and often people don't think that Hawaii is a state of North America. During our unit on map skills this term, we'll be looking at the schema of food to do with farming and land use mainly. Obviously, there are tools and technology to come in with farming. We'll link in with this as well. Our schema of clothing, we'll be looking at types of clothes that people use when they're actually going around reading maps. The materials that the clothes were made of are special. The specialist clothing comes into this. Seasonal clothing according to the weather obviously will play part in this. Our schema of technology will also come into map skills reading, because now we have the technology of electronic gadgets that help us read maps. We have sat-nav, we have our phones that can help us with this. Satellite navigation always comes into this, so it's a big part of our unit this term. So, what will we be doing in geography? Well, in geography we will be starting our unit called Get Lost in a Map. We'll be learning to read various types of maps, atlases and reading coordinates to find directions on Ordnance survey maps. So remember to look out for our WOW Day, which will be on Wednesday the 2nd of February, when we will have a day dressed up as explorers to do orienteering using maps to guide us. Where would you use an Ordnance survey map and what features are found on Ordnance survey maps? How may we find things easily on our Ordnance survey maps? This is what we'll be looking at into more detail, certainly using skills to do with maths, which involve coordinates. We'll also look at our local area to collate ranges of information that we can use to create our own maps and use keys with them. There are many different types of maps that we can use to read for different reasons. The children will be learning to read all of these. These maps depend on whether the geography is a physical or human geography. For example, physical maps or topographic maps that are sometimes known as show us how the land is set up. They show lakes, rivers, mountains and forests areas, etc. Human maps, like the one to the left, show more how the land is broken down into population, political areas, or how industry is being used on certain land areas. Also, they show how land is being used for housing developments. In other words, these maps show how humans have had an influence on how landscape and human activity has changed. So the map below shows key climate zones throughout the world. Can you match some of the climate zones to the continent they occur on? For example, equatorial, they occur around the equator. Arid areas are hot desert areas. Mediterranean are hot humid areas. Snowy areas are areas in the northern hemisphere where it is colder. Polar areas around the polar ice caps where it's even colder. Our temperate areas, like Great Britain, these are our warmer areas but also have cooler weather and tend to be a lot wetter. You may be used to seeing weather maps such as the one above at the end of the news. These show what types of weather and temperature and wind the country is getting each day. We're going to be looking in more detail at Ordnance survey maps. An Ordnance survey map is used to show the natural features of land in great detail. These could include mountains, rivers, lakes, forests and the countryside areas, and buildings such as schools, post offices or apartment blocks that can also be seen on these maps in built-up, that's urban areas. Public footpaths and bridleways are also represented on these maps. This is why so many people use them when they go walking or hiking or mountaineering. Ordnance survey maps aren't just one big map of the country, they are smaller maps that are broken down for particular areas that are in the country. So they are used by pupils in the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, which has been topical lately, and this is when they do their expeditions. This is where I learned to use an Ordnance survey map, and with it I learned to use a compass, which is used to help you set your directions on the map so that you know which direction you are walking. To use maps, you've got to learn how to use coordinates. So coordinates are the code to crack the position that you are in and where you need to walk to, or wherever you need to travel to if it's on a larger map. Maps are broken down by a grid system printed over them. It gives us a place to set coordinates from. These are set of numbers based on an X and a Y axis at the side and the bottom of the map. The X axis is always red first along the bottom and the Y axis second. So here the blue dot is at 2, 4. A good way to remember which one to read first is a little saying called along the corridor and up the stairs. So we go along the bottom and then you go up the side. Children will be beginning to learn how to read 4-figure grid references and then possibly move on to 6-figure grid references if they pick it up well. 4-figure grid references are when there are double sets of numbers on the X and the Y axes. Okay, so for example, if I put a position into there, the position would be 14, and if I look across, the position would be 35 going up at the side, and they are always represented in brackets with a comma in between them. This is a good maths skill as well for plotting coordinates, and so it's a combined maths skill plus a geographic skill to use. We'll be looking at our local area on maps as well. So these two maps both show the same location of Wren's Nest on Google Earth. The topographic map has been created from the image used on Google Earth. The sat-nav is our new technology of today, which can be installed into cars and phones for us to navigate our way. We could try to include technology in our schemas when we are working in school. So obviously technology with geography, sat-nav is a prime one. This term our curriculum area is going to be called the Circle of Life, and it's going to be about life cycles. As scientists, we're going to try and find out how things work and why. And we're going to be experimenting, hopefully doing lots of growing of plants and looking at how plants grow. We're going to be looking at the life cycles of animals and humans as well. So, as scientists, let's look back at our previous unit that we did on space. What is the order of the planets and how can we remember their order? Well, the planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, and this is how they appear as their distance from the Sun. Mnemonics, like my very eager mother juggles saucepans nimbly, help us to remember the order of the planets, and as you can see, the first letter of each word in that mnemonic helps remember which planet appears where. Now, the unit that you did in Year 4 was humans and animals, and one question is, what are invertebrates? Well, invertebrates are animals that don't have a backbone. They have no backbone at all. Vertebrate obviously is an animal with a backbone. Again, we will look at our schemas within the unit, and within our schema of food we will look at farming, environmental factors of how the animals and where the animals live. We will look at technology and how technology has changed, certainly when it comes to growing plants and cultivating plants. We'll be looking at plant growth and how factories are involved with growing plants, and obviously importing and exporting plants from different countries. That is why we have different species of plants in our country that don't actually belong here. Our schema of fashion, we will look at how places have changed over time and have an effect on the environment where plants and animals grow and reproduce. World changes and climate changes have had a change on this, and we'll look at how society has changed to how plants and animals are now bred and how they are reproduced. Our schema of technology, well, I've added one to this. Our technology these days to do with plants and animals is to do with how we transplant, propagate, clone and change and use DNA in order to improve the growth of plants for a better yield for farmers in the future. So our unit this term is called the Circle of Life. So during this term, as scientists, we'll be looking at the life cycle of plants and various species of animals. We will look at reproduction, gestation and growth of each plant and animal during its life cycle. Did you know not all plants and animals reproduce in the same way? Many plants that flower reproduce by producing new seeds for new plants to grow from. Some plants produce spores like fungi and ferns. Other plants can be grafted or grow from cuttings to produce cloned plants. Just a quick think and link from previous units you might have learned. You may already know something about animal life cycles already. So remember when you were in reception and you saw the chicks hatch from their eggs? Well, that was the life cycle of the chicken. They start as eggs, they grow as an embryo, they're hatchling when they first hatch, they grow into the chick and they form and develop into an adult chick, which will also then start to produce legs again, and the life cycle goes on. The same happens with the life cycle of a frog. Maybe you've visited a local pond or been a walk along the canal. Possibly a member of the family has a pond in the garden. Often frogs use these as their place to breed and produce tadpoles that change into frogs. This process is called metamorphosis. Many species start their life cycle as an egg. The egg incubates, the bird or animal hatches from the egg. Did you know alligators and crocodiles begin their life cycle as an egg as well? We'll be studying different influential naturalists from over the past century. These people have been key to studying the nature of plants, animals and the world around us in order to be able to understand more about the life of plants and animals. You may recognise the picture of Sir David Attenborough below. Can you name any of the others? During the next few weeks, as scientists, we'll be all naturalists studying various plant and animal life cycles. We will be setting up our own experiments growing various plants from seeds and by propagating plants to clone from a mature plant. We will observe and analyse and present data on how these plants grow. So there is going to be lots of new fun learning taking place in Year 5 over the autumn term, with lots of action-packed lessons. We can't wait to share all of our wonderful knowledge on these new subjects with your children. I know for certain I'm really looking forward to teaching this year group. I've already seen that they are a wonderful bunch of children. So there is going to be lots of new. So that covers all the main learning that will be happening in Year 5 up until Easter. As always, remember we are always here if you have any questions or concerns, either by Mrs. Flavel, Miss Whitehouse and Mrs. Reed. We're really looking forward to learning together this term. So if you do any work at home with your children, or the children are taking it upon themselves to do any research on their computers, please get in touch with us. We love to hear about it. Share what you've been practicing at home with us. You can do this via email, you can do it via the WhatsApp, or you can even come in and pop and see us at the door when we come and see the children out on an evening. We're always glad to hear what you've been doing. Have a good term. Take care. Bye.